Hello guys and gals, and this is part 2 of the Provensen book of fairy tales. In the last book we read about the lost half hour, which was by Henry Beston. But first of all, this is a book. The Provensen book of fairy tales is compiled and illustrated by Alice and Martin Provensen, which is why it's called the Provensen fairy tales. In this one, we will be reading about The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen. Or Hans. I think it's probably pronounced Hans Christian Andersen. And we're going to just get right on it. This is copyright to 1971. I believe this book is copyright 1971 to be exact. And here we go. The Nightingale. Many years ago, the great country of China was ruled by a mighty emperor. The emperor's palace was the most splendid in the world. It was made entirely of fine porcelain, very costly, but so delicate and brittle that one had to take care how one touched it. In the garden was the most exquisite flowers, and to the loveliest of them was tied silver bells, which tinkled in the breeze, so that nobody could pass by without noticing the flowers. The emperor's beautifully arranged garden was so big that the gardener himself did not know where the end was. If a man went on and on, he came into a glorious forest with the high trees and deep lakes. The wood extended straight down to the sea, which was blue and deep, and in the trees lived a nightingale, which sang so splendidly that even the poor fisherman, who had many other things to do, stopped still and listened when he had gone out at night to throw out his nets. "How beautiful that is," he said, but he had many tasks to perform, and after a while he forgot the bird. But when the bird sang on the next night, the fisherman exclaimed again, "Oh, how beautiful that is." From all the countries of the world, travelers came to the city of the emperor and admired it, and the palace, and the garden. And when they heard the nightingale, they said, "That is the best of all." And the travelers told of it when they came home. And the wise men among them wrote many books about the town, the palace, and the gardens, but they esteemed the nightingale highest of all, and those who were poets wrote magnificent poems about the nightingale in the wood by the deep lake. The books and poems went through all the world, and once some of them came to the emperor. He sat on his golden throne and read and read. As he did so, he kept nodding his head, for it pleased him to read the masterly descriptions of the city, the palace, and the garden. But the nightingale is the best of all, said all the books, and the poem extolled the bird in exquisite language. "What's that?" exclaimed the emperor. "I don't know this nightingale at all. Is there such a bird in my empire, even in my own garden? I've not heard of it. To think I should have to learn such a thing for the first time from books." And hereupon he called his cavalier. This cavalier was so grand that if anyone lower in rank than himself dared to speak to him or to ask him any questions, he answered nothing but "Singpi," and that meant nothing. Singpi or Singpei. There is said to be a wonderful bird here called a nightingale," said the emperor. "They say it is the best thing in all of my great empire. Why have I not heard anything about it?" I've never heard him either," replied the cavalier. "He has never been introduced at court." "I command that he shall appear this evening and sing before me," said the emperor. "All the world knows what I possess, and I do not know it myself." "I've never heard him mentioned," said the cavalier, "but I will seek him. I shall find him." But where was this nightingale to be found? The cavalier ran up and down all the staircases, through halls and passages, but no one among all of those whom he met had heard talk of the Nightingale. And the cavalier ran back to the emperor, and said it must be a fable, invented by the writers of the books. Your Imperial Majesty cannot believe how much is written that is fiction, besides something they call... Your Imperial Majesty cannot believe how much is written that is fiction, besides something they call the black art. But the book in which I read this, said the emperor, was sent to me by the high and mighty Emperor of Japan. It cannot be a falsehood. I will hear the Nightingale. It must be here this evening. It has my imperial favor. And if it does not come at the court, and if it does not come, all the court shall be trampled upon after the court has supped. Sung Pi, said the cavalier, and again he ran up and down all the staircases and through all the halls and corridors, and half the court ran with him, and for the courtiers did not like the idea of being trampled upon. Then there was a great inquiry after the wonderful Nightingale, which all the world knew except the people of the emperor's court. At least they met a poor little girl in the kitchen who said, "The Nightingale? I know it well, yes, and it can sing gloriously. Every evening I get leave to carry my poor sick mother to scraps from the table. She lives down by the strand, and when I get back, tired and rest in the wood, then I hear the Nightingale sing, and then the tears come into my eyes, and it is just as if my mother kissed me." "Little kitchen girl," said the cavalier, "I will get you a better place in the kitchen, one where you can see the emperor dine, if you will lead me to the Nightingale, for it is demanded for this evening." So they all went out into the wood, where the Nightingale was accustomed to sing. Half the court went forth. When they were in the midst of their journey, a cow began to move. "Oh," cried the court pages, "now we have it. That shows a wonderful power in so small a creature. I have certainly heard it before." "No, those are cows mooing," said the little kitchen girl. "We are a long ways from the place yet. Now the frogs begin to croak in the marsh." "Glorious," said the Chinese court preacher. "Now I hear it. It sounds like a little temple. It sounds like little temple bells." "No, those are frogs," said the little kitchen maid. "But now I think we shall soon hear it." Then the Nightingale began to sing. That is it," exclaimed the little girl. Listen, listen. Yonder it sits." And she pointed to the little gray bird. "Is it possible?" cried the cavalier. "I should never have thought it looked like that. How simple it looks. It must certainly have lost its color at seeing such grand people around." "Little Nightingale," called the kitchen maid, "our gracious emperor wishes you to sing before him. Will you?" "With the greatest pleasure," replied the Nightingale, and began to sing most delightfully. "It sounds just like crystal bells," said the cavalier, "and look at its little throat. How it's working. It's wonderful that we should never have heard it before. That bird will be a great success at court." "Shall I sing once more before the emperor?" asked the Nightingale, for the bird thought the emperor was present. "My excellent little Nightingale," said the cavalier, "I have great pleasure in inviting you to the court festival this evening, when you shall charm his Imperial Majesty with your beautiful singing." "My song sounds best in the green wood," replies the Nightingale. Still it came willingly when it heard what the emperor wished. The palace was festively adorned. The walls and the floor, which were of porcelain, gleamed in the rays of thousands of golden lamps. The most glorious flowers, which could ring clearly, had been placed in the passages, and there was a running to and fro, and all the bells rang so loudly in the breeze that no one could hear oneself speak. In the midst of the great hall, where the emperor sat, a golden perch had been placed for the Nightingale. The whole court was there, and the little cook maid had got leave to stand behind the door, as she had now received the title of a real court cook. All were in full dress, and all looked at the little gray bird. The nightingale sang so gloriously that the tears came into the emperor's eyes and ran down his cheeks. And when the nightingale song still more... Oh. Let me plug my phone back in here. And when the nightingale sang still more sweetly, the emperor was so pleased that he said the nightingale should have his golden slipper to wear around its neck. But the nightingale declined this with thanks, saying, "I have seen tears in the emperor's eyes. That was the real treasure to me, and emperor's tears have a peculiar power. I am rewarded enough." Then the nightingale sang again with a sweet and glorious voice. "Of all the coquetry," exclaimed the ladies who stood round about, and they took water in their mouths to gargle when anyone spoke to them. They thought they would sound like nightingales too, and the lackeys and chambermaids reported they were satisfied too, and that was saying a good deal, for they are the most difficult to please. In short, the nightingale achieved a real success. The bird was now to remain at court, to have his own cage, with liberty to go out twice every day, and once at night. 12 servants were appointed when the nightingale went out, each of whom held a silken string fastened to the bird's leg. There was really no pleasure in an excursion of that kind. The whole city spoke of the wonderful bird, and when two people met, one said nothing but Nightin, and the other one said Gale, and then they sighed and understood each other. 11 peddlers' children were named after the bird, but not one of them could sing a note. One day the emperor received a large parcel on which was written, "The Nightingale." "This must be a new book about this celebrated bird," said the emperor. It was not a book, however, but a little work of art contained in a box, an artificial nightingale, which was designed to sing like a natural one, and was brilliantly ornamented with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. As soon as the artificial bird was wound up, he could sing one of the pieces that the real nightingale sang, and his tail moved up and down, and shone with silver and gold around his neck. His nightingale song, and his tail moved up and down, and shone like silver and gold. Around his neck hung a little ribbon, and on it was written, "The nightingale of the Emperor of China is poor compared to that of the Emperor of Japan." "Is that so?" they said they all, and he who has brought the artificial bird immediately received the title Imperial Head Nightingale Bringer. Now the two must sing together. What a duet that will be," they said. And so the two birds had to sing together, but it did not sound very well, for the real nightingale sang in its own way, and the artificial bird sang in another. So they tried having the artificial bird sing alone. It had just as much success as the real one, and besides, it was much handsomer to look at. It shone like necklaces and bracelets. 63 times over the bird sang the same song, and yet was not tired. The people would gladly have heard it again, but the emperor said the living nightingale ought to sing something now. But where was the living nightingale? No one had noticed that it had flown from its cage, out the open window, and back to the green wood. All the courtiers abused the nightingale and declared that it was a very ungrateful creature. We have the best bird after all," said they, and the artificial bird had to sing again, and that was the 34th time they listened to the same piece, and the playmaster praised the bird particularly, declaring that it was better than a real nightingale, not only because of its plumage and many beautiful diamonds, but as a singer as well. For you see, ladies and gentlemen, and above all, your Imperial Majesty, with a real nightingale one can never calculate what is coming, But in this artificial bird, everything is settled. One can explain it. One can open it and make people understand where the songs come from, how they go, and how one follows another. Those are quite our own ideas, they all said. And the speaker received permission to show the bird to the people on the next Sunday. The people were to hear it sing too. The emperor commanded, and they did hear it, and were so much pleased as if they had all got tipsy upon tea, for that's quite the Chinese fashion. And they all said, "Oh," and held up their forefingers and nodded. But the poor fisherman, who had heard the real nightingale, said, "It sounds well enough, and the melodies resemble each other, but there's something wanting, I know not what." The real nightingale was banished from the country and empire. The artificial bird had its place on a silken cushion close to the emperor's bed. All the presents it had received, gold and precious stones, were ranged about it. In title, it had advanced to being the high imperial after-dinner singer, and in rank to number one. On the left hand, for the emperor considered that side the most important, on which the heart is placed. For even in an emperor, the heart is on the left side. And the playmaster wrote a work of 25 volumes about the artificial bird. It was very learned and very long, yet all the people declared that they had to read it and understood it, for fear of being considered stupid. So a whole year went by. The emperor, the court, and all the other Chinese knew every little twitter in the artificial bird's song by heart. But just for that reason, it pleased them best. They could sing it themselves, and they did so. The street boys sang "See, see, see, glug, glug," and the emperor himself sang it too. But one evening, when the artificial bird was singing and the emperor lay in bed listening to it, something inside the bird said whiz. Something cracked. Whirr. All the wheels ran around and the music stopped. The emperor immediately sprang out of bed and caused his physician to be called. But what could he do? Then they sent for a watchmaker, and after a good deal of talking and investigating, the bird was put into something like order. But the watchmaker said the bird must be carefully treated, for the barrels were worn, and it would be impossible to put new ones in so that the music would go. There was a great lamentation. Only once in a year was the bird allowed to sing, and that was almost too much. But then the playmaster began a little speech full of long words, and said the bird was just as good as before, and so of course it was. Now 5 years had gone by, and a real grief came upon the whole nation. The Chinese were really fond of their emperor, and now he was ill, and it was said could not live much longer. Already a new emperor had been chosen, and the people stood out in the street and asked the cavalier how their old emperor did. "Sing Pi," he said, and shook his head. Cold and pale lay the emperor in his great gorgeous bed. The whole court thought him dead, and each one ran to pay homage to the new ruler. All about in all the halls and passages, cloth had been laid down so that no footstep could be heard, and therefore it was quieter there. Very quiet, but the emperor was not dead yet. High up, a window stood open, and the moon shone in upon the emperor and the artificial bird. The poor emperor could scarcely breathe. It was as if something lay upon his chest. He opened his eyes, and then he saw that it was Death who sat upon his chest, and had put out his golden crown. And had put on his golden crown, and held in one hand the emperor's sword, and in the other his beautiful banner. And all around, from among the folds of the splendid velvet curtains, strange heads peered forth, a few very ugly, the rest quite lovely and mild. These were the emperor's bad and good deeds, and they stood before him now that death sat upon his heart. "Do you remember this?" whispered one to the other. "Do you remember that?" And they told him so much that the perspiration ran from his forehead. In distress, the emperor cried, "Music! Music!" And to the artificial nightingale he called, "You little golden bird, sing, sing. I have given you gold and costly presents. I have even hung my golden slipper around your neck. Sing for me now, sing." But the bird stood still. No one was there to wind him up, and he could not sing without that. And death continued to stare at the emperor with his great hollow eyes, and it was fearfully quiet. Then there sounded from the window suddenly the most lovely song. It was the little live nightingale who was sitting outside on a spray, the little gray bird that heard the emperor's sad plight and had come to sing to him of comfort and hope. And as it sang, the spectators grew paler and paler. The blood ran quicker and more quickly through the emperor's weak limbs, and even Death listened and said, "Sing on, little nightingale, sing on." "But will you, Death, give me the emperor's golden sword? Will you give me his rich banner? Will you give me his crown?" sang the nightingale. And Death gave up each of these treasures for a song. The nightingale sang on and on. It sang of the quiet churchyard gardens where white roses grew, where the elder blossoms smelled sweet, and where the fresh grass is moistened by the tears of those mourning their loved ones. At last Death felt a longing to see his garden, and he floated out the window in the form of a cold white mist. "Thanks, thanks," cried the emperor. "You heavenly little bird, I knew you well. I know you well. I banished you from my country and empire, and yet you have charmed away the evil faces from my couch, and banished death from my heart. How can I reward you?" "You have rewarded me," replied the nightingale. "I have drawn tears from your eyes when I sang the first time. I shall never forget that. Those are the jewels that rejoice a singer's heart. But now sleep and grow strong again. I will sing you something." And the nightingale sang, and the emperor fell into a sweet slumber. How refreshing that sleep was! The sun shone upon him through the windows. When he awoke refreshed and restored, not one of his servants had yet returned, for they all thought he was dead. Only the nightingale still sat beside him and sang. "You must always stay with me," said the emperor. "You will sing as you please, and the artificial bird shall be broken into 1,000 pieces." "Not so," replied the nightingale. "It did well as long as it could. Keep it as you have done till now. I cannot build my nest in a palace to dwell in it. I must live in the woods. But let me come when you need me. Then I will sit in the evening on the spray yonder by the tree and sing you something, so that you may be glad and thoughtful at once. I will sing of those who are happy and those who suffer. And as a little singing bird, I fly far around to the poor fisherman, to the peasant's roof, to everyone who dwells far away from you and from your court. I will come and sing to you, but one thing I beg of you. Tell no one that you have a bird who tells you everything." The emperor promised happily with all his heart, and the nightingale flew away. Next morning the servants came in to pay their last respects to their emperor, who they believed was dead, but there he stood, alive and happy and smiling, and he greeted them with a hearty "Good morning." And that was The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen. And this has been a reading from the Provensen's Book of Fairy Tales by, it says in the inside cover, compiled and illustrated by Alice and Martin Provensen. So, that is that. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way at all, that information will be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.